this tutorial, we'll examine the architecture or the structure of syllogisms. We'll look at all the elements involved, and I can show you how all the different parts of the syllogism derive their names. Let's start by reviewing the argument that we looked at in our last tutorial. All young amphibians are creatures with gills. All young frogs are young amphibians. Therefore, all young frogs are creatures with gills. So just to review, we have a mediated inference between F and G, and the mediator, the middle term that stands between those two, is Y, young amphibians. All right, so instead of working with a specific argument with specific terms, let's adopt the approach that we took in our discussion of immediate inferences, and let's look at the syllogism just from the perspective of three categories and their relationships to each other, okay? In other words, we're going to substitute variables in. So for the conclusion, we're going to write all S is P, and then for these two premises, we're going to write all M, that's the middle term, is S, and I'm sorry, so we'll write all S is P for the conclusion. So we have a subject and a predicate of the conclusion. Now for the two premises, we will write all M stands for the middle term, is P. So notice P appears here, P, and all S is M. So there's our argument form, but now we're just using variables for the three different categories, okay? So if we examine this form, one of the things that we'll be able to do is identify the ingredients in a categorical syllogism. In other words, what does it take for an argument to be a categorical syllogism? Okay, so here are the things that it takes. It takes, first of all, three categorical propositions. So notice we have three categorical propositions. All M is P is universal affirmative. All S is M, universal affirmative, and all S is P, universal affirmative. Three categorical propositions. We also need three categories, or in other words, terms. So notice we have S, P, and M. Those are our three terms. We also have to have each term used twice. Exactly twice. So notice, S appears twice, M appears twice, P appears twice. So here's our recipe. Our recipe is we need three categorical propositions, three categories. Each category or term is used exactly twice. An argument that meets these three conditions is a categorical syllogism. Okay, excellent. Now, let's move on to discuss how all the parts of the syllogism are named. And again, we'll just use all M is P, or we'll use the version with variables, right? All S is M. Therefore, all S is P. All right. First of all, the syllogism is going to be an argument, which means it has exactly one conclusion, and in this case, two premises. So everything about the syllogism is named based on the conclusion. So look at the subject term of the conclusion of this argument form. The subject term is called the minor term. So that's the minor term. The predicate term of the conclusion is called the major term. because we have rule number 3, each term is used exactly twice, then it follows that the minor and major terms are going to appear in the conclusion, that's once, and in one of the premises, that's twice. The minor term appears here, and because it's in this premise, we call it the minor premise. The minor premise is the premise that has the minor term in it. Notice that the conclusion will always have the minor term in it because that's how we name everything, from the conclusion. The major term appears in the major premise. The major term then appears always in the conclusion because that's our naming convention, starts with the conclusion, and it appears in the major premise. Standard form for a syllogism is to have the major premise first, the minor premise second, and the conclusion. So that's the way the standard form, so let's look at that, standard form. Standard form is the major premise, the minor premise, therefore the conclusion. Okay, so the important thing about the formal property, the architecture, the structure, the important thing is everything is named from the conclusion, so you're going to want to identify the conclusion first. And incidentally, there's a nice chart about analyzing syllogisms as one of the handouts for the course, so be sure you have a look at that. So you want to identify the conclusion. Based on the conclusion, you know the minor and the major term. Then you put the premise that has the major term in it first, that's the major premise. The premise that has the minor term in it second, that's the minor premise. Okay, so standard form, major premise, minor premise, conclusion. Okay, so far so good. Now, let's look at the structure again. So we have all M is P as the major premise, all S is M as the minor premise, and our conclusion is all S is P. So there we have major premise, minor premise, conclusion. Okay, so now, rule number 1 about categorical syllogisms is we have to have 3 categorical propositions, okay? There's nothing about that rule that says that they have to be universal affirmative. They can be anything. But whatever they are, the types of propositions that are involved is what we call the mood of the syllogism. So let's analyze this one. What is the major premise? It's a universal affirmative. So let's mark that one A. Remember, A is the vowel that corresponds to universal affirmative. The minor premise is all S is M. That's universal affirmative, so that's also A. And what is the conclusion? All S is P. That's universal affirmative also, so that is an A. So the mood of this particular syllogism, this one, the mood is AAA. So we give the mood in standard form order. Major premise, minor premise, conclusion. So major premise, minor premise, conclusion. So the mood is given as 3 vowels, A, A, A. Doesn't have to be like that. Consider the proposition. Consider the changing these categorical propositions to this. No P is M. All S is M. Therefore, no S is P. Okay, so major premise has P in it. Minor premise has S in it. The conclusion always has the minor and major, so we're set, right? Major premise, minor premise, conclusion in the right order for standard form. So let's go ahead and just make this obvious. There we go. Now, what is the type categorical proposition of the major premise? No P is M is an E. All S is M is an A, universal affirmative, and no S is P is an E. So the mood of this particular structure is EAE. So there's another mood, EAE. look at one more example. Suppose we have an A for the major premise. That's going to be all P is M. Let's have sum S is M. Therefore, sum S is P. Okay? So let's analyze this. The major premise, and again, just to reinforce this, minor term, major term. Major premise has the major term in it. Minor premise has the minor in it. Okay, perfect. So now, what is the type proposition of the major? That's an A. The type of the minor premise is an I. And the type of the conclusion is I. So, the mood of this particular form is A, I. So, it should be fairly obvious, if you think about this, that the mood of a syllogism could be any three letters, any three letters that correspond to categorical proposition types we could have. So AII is fine. IOI, that's a mood. EEO, that's a mood. What's not a mood? Well, how about AO? Not a mood. How about AIIE? Not a mood. Why? Because there are too few in this case and too many propositions in this case. The first rule, 3 categorical propositions.